BSNL has got another lifeline, and this time the cabinet has approved a revival package of 89,000 crore for Bharat Sanchar Nigam Limited, also called BSNL, the dwindling telecom operator. This is the third revival package for BSNL, bringing the total sum pumped into the ailing public sector telecom company to 3.22 lakh crore in the last 5 years itself. Now, the latest package includes an allotment of 4G and 5G spectrum for BSNL through equity infusion. What does it mean for BSNL and for telecom sector at large? To talk about that and more, joining me at this point in time is Saurabh Uboweja, who is the managing partner at Board Consulting. Also with us is Sandeep, Bhargava, who is the former EVP of Vodafone Idea. In the studio, my colleague Rakesh Khar. Also with us is Krishnakumar. Gentlemen, appreciate you all joining us at this point in time. I want to come to you first, Rakesh. It does look like that we are constantly throwing, good money behind bad money, or a company that's not really performing.
Hi Shweta, thank you, for once again being with you on the show. Why we're discussing BSNL is, first of all, it's very important to put that in context.
Absolutely.
We're discussing the telecom sector in India, which is probably one of the largest growing telecom spaces across the world, and it has shown such huge potential. Of course, BSNL is a laggard. I have no shame in saying that. We all know that. Yeah. So, if you were government, what would you do, Shweta? I mean, you're in a very difficult situation. It's deep devil and deep sea.
Right.
What's happening is that, if you can't allow it to die.
Right.
And if you have to keep it alive, you have to feed it. And feed it well.
Yes.
So feed it well and just feed it and keep it on a drip. That's the difference of approaches that we must examine very closely. So what is happening is, I think the government is trying to feed it well, and there are some marginal returns already. So what the government said, one-line statement yesterday said, BSNL will emerge as a stable telecom player. So, that's the trajectory from a business perspective that the government is looking at, BSNL shaping up with this fresh infusion. So, once you feed it well, what does it all lead to? What are the possibilities? I do remember, Shweta, that we have my friend Krishna also on the show, that when Vajpayee was about to bow out, in 2004 elections, so what happened is that 2009, my apology, was BSNL was also on the agenda in terms of privatization, because Vajpayee government took the historic step of privatizing Hotel Corporation of India and also Hindustan Zinc Limited. And we know that Hindustan Zinc Limited, now owned by Vedanta, has really turned around the corner. And despite being not a as strong a government as it was is available today because of sheer numbers, Vajpayee did do the historic piece of bringing about reforms and going for all right privatization.
Right.
So what will happen with BSNL? So 2-3 guesses that I have. One is that they want to keep it strong and healthy. And there are some interesting results. It has about 9% overall market share, which is not bad. 9% in a 4-player market is not that bad to begin with. Of course, they've been losing every year and every quarter.
Literally 10% of the market share.
10% of the market share. And there are states like Himachal Pradesh where it has 22% market share. So I'm just giving you these stats so that we know where we are. And operating profitability of BSNL over the last few quarters has improved post the infusion in 19 and 2022. So those two large pieces that you mentioned. So is there a scope to grow it and nurse it to perfect health? Not really. But the idea is I'm sticking my neck out. I think 2024 first quarter, once the new government comes in, possibly it will be privatized.
Okay.
I'll get you to details.
That's a good guess. That is a good.
I'm sticking my neck out.
Okay,
I think because the Air India experience has been extremely fruitful.
Yes.
And before I hand it over to other esteemed guests we have, it's very important from the government's perspective to also keep it alive, because it can't invite the charge directly of promoting a monopoly and a duopoly, because we have just 3 players. Out of that, again, government has invested in Vodafone with a 33% stake.
Right.
And Shweta, if I may, of the 3 players, you have one player in a precarious position, which is the Vodafone Idea Group.
Absolutely.
And in that sense, it becomes a necessity to keep BSNL alive for the sake of the people of the country. If of the 3 players, of only 3 players, you have one which is on the brink of economic collapse, you need to have a 3rd player, and you have a player like BSNL which services the unserviceable markets, the unglamorous markets, the not so great markets where no towers. For example, BSNL is in the process of putting up 20,000 towers across rural areas of India where there is no private people putting up towers, and that's going to connect around 25,000 villages across India for the sake of rural India and for the sake of urban India, which will be left to the just two players. Eventually, if everything were to go awry, and let's hope not, BSNL becomes that crucial piece holding India's telecom sector together.
Okay, so the infusion therefore seems very necessary at this point in time. Let's get in Saurabh Uboweja into this conversation. Saurabh, appreciate you taking time out. Do you also stick your neck out for BSNL? You think it's going to turn around, because government is very upbeat. Government says the first and the second tranche was to bring BSNL from the brink of collapse. The third and the fourth one is going to help it, become a stable telecom operator in the country. Do you agree with that government analysis?
Yes. Interestingly, if you see from 2019 onwards, there's been a genuine intent demonstrated by the government to not just keep BSNL alive, but also to make it thrive in the near future. And if you see the trend of infusions which have happened from the government side, that includes both cash and non-cash, it is intended with a very, very clear agenda that this is going to be one of the companies which will continue to stick around for a long time. And of course, with their equity in Vodafone as well, up to 33%. So technically you have a PSU and a PSU in making, with Vodafone struggling to sustain itself with the private shareholders. The other interesting or important thing to take into account is that, when you have a strategic asset like BSNL, you don't always see it purely from the lens of profitability. Like one of our guests shared, one of the big agendas for BSNL going forward is remote connectivity. There's still a couple of thousand villages in higher numbers that are absolutely disconnected from any kind of formal internet economy. And you're doing also fulfilling the agenda that you have as a government in terms of how you want to support its citizens. Also, not to forget that there are at least 60,000 employees plus still working at BSNL, so it's jobs for them. So you can say that there is a blend of a social agenda, but at the same time, a genuine intent to make sure that we don't have a duopoly getting created with just Airtel and Jio. So yeah, I think it's a bold decision. It's something which is commendable as well. It would hopefully put pressure on the other competitors to continue to invest in a way that they can continue to enhance the experience of their customers.
Okay. Let me also get in Sandeep. Sandeep, appreciate you speaking to News9. I want to straight up bring into conversation an important point that my colleague Krishna here also alluded to, and that is connecting the weakest of weak to digital India. And BSNL, government says, is on that path. It's on the path of serving the unserved in areas specifically which are not commercially viable for private players, and that is where BSNL comes in. It is an important asset, not just for the fact that it brings in a lot of value to the government, but also that it is connecting a large section of unconnected people, and therefore it is important to keep pumping in money. However, to what point? What is the future of BSNL looking like? Because Rakesh here says that one way forward could be, and this is a pure assumption here, is for them to merge perhaps Vodafone and BSNL, and then there would be a consolidated combined entity. Do you see that happening? What are your guesses?
Shweta, thank you for getting me in. And per my experience and the way BSNL has been brought to the fore, I think there are multiple agendas in place. What my colleagues have said is also true. But getting to the unconnected and getting the digital adoption in place is a very, very important milestone for this present government. And we also foresee the government continuing 24 beyond. I don't want to make any words there. And also bringing the Atmanirbhar Bharat, what you call the Make in India connection. If you see, while this money was being doled out to BSNL, 89,000 almost crores, there has already been an advance purchase order being given to TCS and Tejas Networks. Now, never ever in the history of BSNL so far, I being worked in the entire domain of Microsoft, Nokia, Siemens Networks, and Vodafone ultimately, I have not seen these private local vendors coming to that top level, whereas the Nokias and Ericssons and the others are not there. So this is a very hard push towards Make in India as well. So while we are reaching out to the unconnected, we are reaching out to the rural areas, there is a strong push for the Atmanirbhar Bharat and Make in India campaign. That comes very clearly on this. And if you see, as I said, the orders have already been flowing to them. So making them BSNL viable to really stand up and stand against the competition while maintaining a 9% market share, which is current. But I'm sure in times to come in, they will increase their market share and presence in the rural belt. Also, we heard the minister saying that very soon BSNL will stop losing customers come October, November onwards. So BSNL is yet to go get onto the 4G and 5G bandwagon. So once they are onto this, with almost 1 lakh sites orders being placed between ITI and the TCS, I'm sure they will make a comeback. Not maybe in urban so much, but definitely a rural connect is a very strong foothold of BSNL.
Okay. You know, this is very interesting because, and let me put it this way, I correct me if I'm wrong, but BSNL, people have some sort of trust and faith in BSNL. It's like they have a set base of customers, Rakesh, that they do not lose out on. My husband being one of them, he refuses to leave, opt out of BSNL, switch to Vodafone.
Unfortunately, Shweta, he is in a brute minority. I don't think trust is the issue here. I think what is probably happening is that they've not been able to retain. So I think factually we're not right when we say they've been able to retain their customers. They had the majority of this, numbers when these two big private players came, and then finally Jio came and they took most of, not only BSNL, it took up all private players. I think BSNL is a story here to stay and sustain for a variety of reasons. But first of all, I think I would like to counter my colleague Krishna. We should not read too much into this digital connectivity mandate of the government.
Okay.
It is the mandate of the government, but it is actually the mandate of all private players in telephony. So I would imagine a Jio and a, Bharti doubling up their game to reach every consumer in this country.
Okay.
They're not, with the 400 plus million subscribers for Jio, where does it grow? It grows in rural India. And it wants that last mile connectivity to happen across length and breadth, all geographies of this country. So that may be government's listed agenda, but for BSNL as a corporate entity, that's not obviously the only point that will sustain itself. So what does it sustain itself with? This infusion will help it drive the technological edge which it was missing. That's 4G and 5G installation. So in that sense, it will become competitive. It was not competitive as a service. I'm not talking about the employee count and the employee performance. I'm saying technology competitiveness. In that sense, it will become competitive.
Okay.
And the other big challenge for BSNL, to my hypothesis, that it will be privatized completely like Air India. Once we move forward to 2024 elections, and the government, whichever government comes into play, should have this on the top of the agenda, because their Air India template has been well established. The challenge here is that, if you do current valuations, Krishna, I think 33% stake of government in Vodafone will fetch a bigger price as of today's market price than BSNL all put together.
Okay.
So there is an opportunity, there is a challenge. So what does it mean? BSNL actually is strategic, strategic asset base. We may be overplaying that. The only big asset base that they have is land. Now there is some learning there. Earlier this year and earlier also, they refloated the tender to sell some piece of land. That they have. That's why they have these exchanges, hundreds and thousands of those. We still haven't been able to draw any major dividend on that. The price fixed was 3,000 crore outlay, which would be generated by selling that land from MTNL and BSNL, catchment area. So it's not easy to, sell government assets if there is no outright sale, like we have seen in the case of Air India, because charges, corruption and all, it's an interministerial group recommendation. Even earlier, when they tried this a couple of years ago, there were no takers, because they know the process of the labyrinth is so strong in the challenge.
Right.
Now, privatization also has a big challenge, as I myself am sticking my neck out. But when you say privatize BSNL, a private company has to come in and say that governmentize me. If there is a term like that. So we are in an interesting situation.
Okay.
So the big question Krishna and our esteemed panel must look at is, who are the big potential players who could either take charge of Vodafone and who could ultimately, if BSNL is privatized the way we are looking at, and that's the only road ahead to bring in profitability and to bring a strong P&L connect, which is very, very important for even a government corporation. We cannot live in today's age and time say that government has a social agenda, so it should be happy with just that.
Okay.
Fulfill the social agenda
But
with all
also
the
make money.
attendant profit and loss,
Absolutely.
prerequisites.
Absolutely.
Krishna,
Keep
over to you.
P&L into consideration.
Let me begin by responding to this. One is definitely make profits. Whatever company you are, public sector enterprise, private sector enterprise, you are an enterprise. And an enterprise is out there to be enterprising and make profits out of it. There is absolutely no disagreement on that front. And it's great that we live in a day and age where the government is also looking at companies to becoming more profitable, as far as it's not a burden on the exchequer at the end of the day. So as far as the merger is concerned, first the government will have to look at the BSNL MTNL merger because that's been in the works for a while as well. I don't know what is the progress or what is the status
That's
of
by
that.
and large formalized, Krishna.
Right. So we have it's a process that's yet to take place, and I'm saying that that process will take place, and then that becomes a merged entity, and then that becomes Vodafone plus BSNL plus
Not
MTNL.
necessarily. I think they'll keep Vodafone, to my mind, separately. Let's hear our experts.
Let's bring in Saurabh at this point in time. Saurabh, what is the way forward for BSNL? As you heard my colleague there, one way of looking at it could be a merger between BSNL and Vodafone, but there are other options on the table as well. What we are essentially looking at is for BSNL to be privatized, and there's a great playbook here, as we alluded to by the way of Air India. Air India, once privatized, it's a success story today. An attempt was made and there was a success. So if BSNL, it comes to that, it could turn up into a very profitable entity if in the right hands.
A couple of fundamental things, right? So while we have the Air India story, but calling it a success right now, I think is a bit too quick. The acquisition is a success story, but whether Air India is succeeding is something we'll only discover in the next 5 to 6 years. So I think there is no formula that says that if you privatize an organization, it becomes profitable. There are tons of private organizations like Vodafone Idea who also struggle to remain private in their operations. But the intent here from the government doesn't seem to be towards some form of consolidation or the M&A route, at least at this point in time. If that was the case, then they wouldn't be pumping money the way they've been doing over the last 3 years. As far as the MTNL merger is concerned, I think there's been some recent update from the government that it may not make sense to really merge with MTNL. Rather, it makes more sense to just shut it down. Obviously there is a loss to book by the government, but why make an already struggling asset even more struggling by merging it with a more struggling asset, if I may really put it that way. Right. So I think it's a smart decision to not mix the two together and create more problems. But they do have the obligation to onboard the teams, the employees, the human resources from MTNL to BSNL, which is likely to happen or more likely to happen. I think with so much focus by the government on BSNL, the biggest threat at this point in time is on Vodafone Idea. Because they don't actually have any money at all to roll out a 5G network, and their promoters don't seem to be super keen to invest further. It's not showing up. They've already invested a lot of money and they don't seem excited. So the threat is on Vodafone Idea, according to me, with the kind of infusion being done by the government. BSNL is likely to be the third player, in my point of view, not the fourth. And they might end up taking a 15 to 20% share of the market over the next 4 to 5 years.
Right. Hey, thank you for that. And since we're discussing, airline as an analogy for this whole thing, you saw what happened when a small airline like Go First decided to ground its fleet, and then it affected ticket prices so much. So same way in telecom too, there is a situation where you don't want even despite the small market share that they have, BSNL needs to be standing tall at this stage, especially in a situation that Vodafone Idea finds itself. And another thing, Shweta, the fact of the matter is that BSNL as an entity, this is the third time that the government is looking to push things further. My only question at this stage would be how many more and how long, because you're not looking at any movement towards its privatization or towards any concrete decision in terms of what needs to happen for at least another year. So in that sense, what's going to happen over the course of the next 1 year, I think is going to be very interesting as well.
Sandeep?
Yeah, I think in a long term, I don't see the merger of three entities. I'm very clear about that. So BSNL and MTNL may either merge, dissolve, or MTNL gets disbanded. I'm not worried about that, but Vodafone will definitely remain separate. I don't think for all times to come in, they'll be fed like a begging bowl every 3 years or 2 years down the line. They have to get in money to survive by themselves, and there is a possibility of government to exit that. That's what the initial agreement was, bring them up to the line and get an exit out of it. And not to undermine the fact that many global telecom players are still not there in the Indian market. You never know which way the things fold, and there are still some activities happening globally. They may still have an eye on the Indian market, whom to pick up. So to keep BSNL surviving and floating and having a market share, I think is a strong contention from government, and it should happen and it should remain.
It's interesting. I was looking at possible contenders for the Indian telecom space, both in Vodafone and in BSNL going forward. But many of these players were already here. We had about 17 players when India opened up, and most of them have exited. Who are the likely players, according to you, who could possibly see still scope
I
in
don't
coming
want
back?
to make any such comments on this, but there are many players who have still not tasted the Indian market. Deutsche Telekom, never been there. We have been hearing about Hutchinson getting into Vodafone PLC. So that equation is also happening around the UK. If you see the reports in the past at the PLC, Vodafone group level, there is a Hutchinson interest coming in back. So there are many players like this who have still not been there. Brazilian operator, never been here. So you never know, the dynamics changing very fast, and the assets are becoming so bad that they are not able to run on by themselves, or they need to have more sustenance. You never know who comes in.
So possibly,
So we
that's
cannot
the
just rule
plan.
out, because the market appetite is still strong. The government also doesn't want that the existing operators to cobble up these entities, because then the monopolistic attitude comes in play. So they may try to bring a strong contender out here just to keep it afloat. So one
And
government operator shall remain, and the other one could be sold out to any of these entities which are not there. It's all guess game. Don't
no, well, I
assume
mean, I
that
think,
certain things may be happening. It's purely guess.
I would tend to agree with you that I personally believe that they'll keep Vodafone alive and they'll keep BSNL alive. What they do with both of them, government could possibly divest its stake in Vodafone at an appropriate time when it is nursed back to some amount of health, and then probably exit BSNL or keep some majority stake there. That's a matter of speculation as of now. I mean, privatization examples, Air India, you're right, is just taken off in the sense that we still don't know finally whether it will work or not. But Hindustan Zinc, that privatization example, the returns on that investment have are there for everyone to see. Not that every company that gets privatized will always succeed.
Yes.
That possibly is true.
Especially in a space where most have not been able to succeed so far.
Well, I mean, privatization is not panacea to all ills, neither is socialization of enterprise. What is most important, as you rightly mentioned, enterprise must pay for its own itself. I mean, a private sector or government sector, if it's an enterprise, whether it's railways or whether it is airlines or telecom companies, they need to stand on their own 2 feet. Right. You cannot sustain a telecom company purely on government infusion repeatedly over a period of time. In that sense, BSNL, this infusion may have a certain trajectory which we are in agreement with our esteemed panelists, but it has to follow with concrete results on the P&L. There have been some operating profits, but it's still saddled as of the last financial Shweta with 8,500 crore loss.
Absolutely.
And accumulated losses over the last few years is about 1.1 trillion rupees. Which is a large sum of money.
It is.
So in that sense, we, the question for both our panelists is, it makes sense to keep 4 players minimum as of now, and seek for more independent global players. Is that what you would imagine? That should be the scenario. What's an optimum size for Indian telecom market in terms of players entry? 6, 8, 4?
No. See, always, if you see globally, most of the places have been 2 operators. 3 to 4 is a very optimum size for a country like India. And you see globally, country like any other country, you see the best scenario is 3 to 4 operators. It can't be more than that. It can't be lesser than this. And government wants strategically to keep it afloat. And don't undermine the point that the telecom is a very strategic sector. You can't just leave it 100% open to the private and there is no government participation, because many projects, many services are very strategic and very, very much important for the connectivity within the government as well. So we cannot just rule out zero as a government operator. Maybe in some fashion, form, manner, they will certainly survive.
Saurabh,
Yes, so
Yeah.
let's take that question to Saurabh as well.
Saurabh, do you buy that proposition? Personally, I don't know. I'm happy to be corrected. I think this government has moved away from that, too much being focused on what is strategic, what is non-strategic. I mean, airlines itself is too strategic. Or you believe that between airlines and telecom, there is a fine line which, weighs in favor of what our other panelists said.
Yeah, I think very interesting points. Firstly, I feel that the way telecom is designed to operate in India at this point in time, the entry barriers are very, very significant. To be able to operate competitively with the latest technology, the latest infrastructure, and the early mover players have most of them have actually disappeared, barring Airtel, who continue to professionalize their operations. And if you actually had a fourth or a fifth player from outside India coming in, they need to be of the same strength as the Reliance Industries, to be. And the Geo has shown that in very little time you can be extremely relevant. Not just extremely relevant, you can be a market leader. So, and that's hope for maybe some of the very large telecom operators around the world. But the challenge could be that they may themselves not have play in their own territories at this point in time. So to look at India, they've got to come with big, big money. You can't enter small anymore. So that's out of the question. And I actually see the government like almost like a private equity player who has the ability to pump in money, who has the ability to build an ecosystem, let's say, of native technology providers. And in that sense, it starts building or rather supports building a bit of an ecosystem around telecom. As of today, most of the technology does come from outside India. I think there is that part which the government for sure has in mind, whether it's Sony or Ericsson or Nokia or and the others. So the Airtel CMD, which is Mr. Sunil Bharti Mittal, did announce that they have reduced their dependency on the Chinese telecom technology providers. They don't source anything from Huawei, for example, anymore. And so what you do see is now our dependency is on the European providers. I think what the government is very keen for is, while it tries to put up a brave front in terms of BSNL, is also to build a very strong tech layer or manufacturing layer. Is a much larger agenda that seems to be playing out here. Because they are actually giving opportunities to Indian-grown companies to support the rollout of the new infrastructure, which is actually quite fascinating.
Okay. At this point, and we have well established the fact that BSNL is critical, operations of BSNL is critical, but alluding to the point of how enterprise need to be enterprising, essentially be making profit at some point of time. And on popular demand, a question just came to me from the PCR, my colleagues, definitely wanting to know, what is the stage till which you keep assisting BSNL? Till what time, till what point, you keep reviving it? There has to be a full stop, a stoppage at which you decide, okay, we're not making enough money, our losses continue to sustain in the books, and therefore it's about time to look for someone to divest our stake in. So where do we put that stop, Rakesh?
I mean, it's very difficult to put a stop because the government is invested in the idea, as we said, and the reason why it is invested in the idea, we don't know finally whether it wants to completely exit at a healthy price or it wants to stay invested and have a baby which is nursed well. So there are early signs of some recovery. As I said, operating profits have improved. But if you put that in contrast with, say, Jio, 4-year-old company, it clocked a net profit of 18,000 crore plus for the last fiscal. Imagine there is a 8,500 crore loss and there is a 18,000 crore plus profitability. So in that sense, anyone who is looking at the enterprise value will have a challenge. To my mind, there is a sufficient and a very potential asset base that the BSNL and MTNL put together. MTNL's land asset base will get transferred to BSNL. That process is already on. Whether as an entity it will stay alive or not, that I think ultimately it will be BSNL. In that sense, the challenge here is that it's a huge potential, but ability to leverage that potential, sell that land where those exchanges are housed, is not going to be easy. If we are able to navigate that, then BSNL's P&L suddenly looks very warm. So that's the challenge here. And most important point is, because we are in an election year, that's why nothing is happening on that front. What happens to 66,000 employees, Krishna? And if you look at pure play employee output at a telecom company, say Jio, versus a BSNL. Unfortunately, for whatever reasons, mismanagement, bad leadership, or just a capital equity infusion without any direct results, most of these employees would, I'm sorry to say that, when you compare that with big ticket other 2 players, 3 players, they would stand out to be not being seen as efficient.
Absolutely.
So if you are able to
output.
navigate the land parcel they have well and monetize it well. Second, if you are able to take a call on that large salary expenditure which is linked to the 66,000 employees, probably we have a better way of managing the P&L in the question that you asked. If you infuse capital to what result? If
Till
the
what
P&L
end,
looks,
to what
looks
result?
better. So
Absolutely.
Firmly to my mind, I would be happy to hear our experts, the infusion will continue.
Okay. Saurabh, the infusion will continue. I mean, as a consumer, there are just 2 things that worry me when I talk about telecom. One, how much do I have to pay? When will I get better connectivity? And 2, what are the variety of choices do I have? With BSNL specifically, it is my money, the taxpayers' money that is going into BSNL, infusion on infusion without any result.
Yeah, so I wouldn't use a hard statement like without any result. I think it's a flow of money from the citizens to the government to BSNL, the BSNL to the entire ecosystem that they support back to the citizens, right? So money never sticks around. It's just flowing and creating value along the way. The question is, as some of the panelists have said, will BSNL be able to create sufficient value with the infusion that's happened? I think evidence shows over the last 3 years that they've managed to have a couple of breakthroughs. And otherwise, this entire money could have come in one shot. It didn't. I think the government has also laid down certain milestones of performance. And the bailouts or support or equity infusion or increase in authorized capital, all of these things will continue to happen maybe for another 2 or 3 years. But I think at the end of the day, if BSNL has a plan to turn profit in about 7 to 8 years also, it's a worthy investment.
Sandeep, is it a worthy investment? Sandeep, can you hear me?
Sorry, we got a weaker link.
Yes, I'm asking,
Shweta?
I'm asking, is it a worthy investment? Saurabh alluded to the fact that it's not a waste of money. One shouldn't be calling it at that just as yet. There has been some turnaround. The company is on a path to revival. It is essential to keep BSNL afloat. You think it's worthy investment? And what, according to you, how long should this infusion of money continue? A question I asked Rakesh.
So difficult to guess on the time domain, but definitely investment will not go down the drain. Whatsoever contemplating, they will build up the networks, so the asset will build up and the asset will remain. So even if we go to the other panelist take that it will be sold out at an appropriate time, or even if it get merges across out, there will be some asset which is having the best of the equipment if we see the 4G, 5G orders flowing out. And more is like Make in India or the other European operators vendors, for example. So the asset will be built up. I don't see that it will go down the drain.
Okay, asset not likely to go down drain, but BSNL, important story there. Story of a public sector unit that's been dwindling but keeping hopes alive. It is an important asset of the government. It is also important to the country at large to keep BSNL alive and not let the market become a duopoly. We are discussing the story today. We will continue to come back to it in a later course of time. Sandeep, Saurabh, Rakesh, thanks very much for joining with your inputs on that very important, crucial story.